She threw me out of my own home, thinking she had won. I waited 3 months while she burned through $500,000 on luxury. I was the only one who knew she hadn't finished reading the will, and that her greed was the trigger for the trap. When I finally uttered the code phrase to the lawyer, it became the most expensive reckoning of her life. My name is Richard, and I'm 72 years old. The story began with the sudden, agonizing loss of my son. He was my anchor, my partner, and my only child. When he passed, the void he left was immense. But before the grief could even fully settle, his wife Stella had already begun calculating her net worth. Stella had always been cold, obsessed with status and money. But her reaction to his passing was purely clinical. She viewed his death less as a tragedy and more as an immediate, massive financial opportunity. She wasted no time asserting her legal right as the surviving spouse to all his financial assets. Her focus was absolute: liquidate assets, cash out, and upgrade her lifestyle. She saw me, the grieving father, as nothing more than inconvenient dead weight. She made her move quickly and brutally. A mere 2 weeks after the funeral, she called me into the living room, the room where I had spent countless evenings with my son, and gave me my walking papers. If you find yourself gripped by tales of calculated revenge against sheer arrogance and greed, make sure you subscribe right now so you don't miss any part of this unfolding drama or future stories of perfect justice. She sat across from me, sipping expensive champagne that hadn't even been uncorked when my son was alive. "Richard," she began, not with sympathy, but with cold, businesslike detachment. "I've gone over the will. It's clear. All of David's liquid assets come to me. I'm now the sole owner of the house and all accounts." She paused for effect, savoring my pain. "Your days here are over, old man. I need to free up capital, and frankly, you living here rent-free is an enormous liability I am no longer willing to carry." The casual cruelty of her words, the blatant disregard for my grief and my connection to my home, ignited a slow, internal flame of retaliation. She finished with the ultimate condescending insult. "I got my millions, and you need to go back to that old, outdated rental apartment you foolishly kept. Your retirement is your problem now." She thought the will gave her everything, but I knew my son better than anyone. He was sharp, cynical about Stella's character, and deeply loving towards me. Stella was so focused on the main document that she completely missed the secret, tiny loophole he had built specifically for her. I simply nodded, gathered my few belongings, and walked out, letting her believe her victory was absolute. My revenge required patience, and more importantly, her continued, spectacular overspending. Stella's calculated cruelty didn't end with her verbal dismissal. She moved with ruthless speed to consolidate her supposed victory. The house, the beautiful colonial my son and I had restored together, filled with 3 generations of memories, was immediately listed for sale. I watched numbly from my old quiet rental apartment as she executed the sale in under 2 weeks. She didn't offer me a single object, not a piece of furniture, not even a photograph. She stripped the place bare and handed me the keys to my previous life, making it painfully clear that my presence was toxic to her shiny new future. "It's a huge burden off my shoulders, Richard," she told me during our last brief interaction, handing me a small box with my few remaining personal items. The house was so dated. I'm moving to a new, modern condo downtown. You know, somewhere that actually reflects my success. You'll be fine here, though. This place is quaint." Her sneer when she said the word quaint was the final shard of glass that solidified my resolve. She had not only discarded me, but openly mocked the quiet, respectable life my son and I valued. But her arrogance was her weakness. Stella's need to demonstrate her newfound wealth by selling the house, the very place she thought symbolized her victory, was the single biggest mistake of her life. Why? Because my son David was a meticulous planner, especially when it came to Stella. David was a successful businessman, and the core of his wealth came from the sale of his tech startup years ago. He knew Stella was only with him for the money. We shared a quiet understanding, a professional respect that went deeper than normal family ties. A year before he died, David and I had a long conversation about his will. He didn't trust Stella with his legacy or my well-being. He was smart enough to know that hiding money directly would invite legal scrutiny. Instead, he used a specialized, little-known clause in the state's trust law, hinging everything on an obscure trigger. That trigger was the sale of the house. The house was not just property. It was the condition for Stella's inheritance. David's legal setup was genius. It allowed Stella to believe she had control over the financial assets, provided she respected the sanctity of the family home. But her greed, her need to liquidate and move on to a flashier life, guaranteed she would break that condition. I had the knowledge, but not the power. Yet, I had to let her commit the final act of financial hubris. I had to wait until she was deeply committed to her false narrative of wealth. My revenge wasn't about spite. It was about activating my son's final, perfectly executed defense mechanism against her avarice. I settled into my tiny apartment, my constant companion being David's elderly cat, Mittens, who Stella had also tried to discard. Mittens was the other key. I started monitoring Stella's social media accounts. The designer clothes, the trips to Dubai, the absurdly expensive jewelry. I was waiting for the perfect moment, the point of no return. Swamp was too blinded by the zeros in David's financial statements to notice the tiny, peculiar details in his last will and testament. She only scanned for the big numbers, confirming that the bulk of his liquid wealth, the $5 million from the tech company sale, was hers as the immediate heir. That was the headline she wanted. But the body of the will contained a curious little footnote, placed deliberately far from the main financial clauses. It was an absurdity that Stella, focused on luxury brands, dismissed instantly. The clause read, "I leave $50,000 for the lifelong care and comfort of Mittens the cat, as per the conditions of Heritage Code 47-A, referenced in Addendum Y." Mittens, David's elderly cat, had been a huge comfort to me after David's death. But Stella hated the animal. She saw the $50,000 as a silly, sentimental gesture. She likely scoffed and thought, $50,000 for a cat? What a waste! But it's mine to manage now. She never bothered to look up the Heritage Code 47-A or, crucially, find Addendum Y. Her legal team, focused on the transfer of the main assets, probably considered it an irrelevant, non-binding, humorous clause. This was exactly David's intention. He knew Stella's attention span faded the moment the money started flowing. The $50,000 for the cat was a genius misdirection, a way to embed a massive legal bomb inside a piece of emotional junk she was guaranteed to ignore. In the meantime, my monitoring of Stella's life became almost a job. Her Instagram feed was a continuous, sickening catalog of her hubris. First, the new sports car, a fiery red convertible. Then, the first-class trips to exotic islands. Next, a sickeningly lavish renovation of her new condo, complete with bespoke furniture and a massive, gold-plated walk-in closet. I watched the digital breadcrumbs of her spending, calculating the inevitable burn rate. I wasn't just observing her. I was waiting for her to cross the $500,000 threshold. I needed to ensure her fall was not just about losing money, but about financial obliteration. I needed her to be personally liable, deep in the red. My son had designed the trap to be activated only when her greed led to reckless spending. Had she been careful, the trust might have remained dormant longer. But Stella was a black hole of consumption. The patience was agonizing. Every time I saw a photo of her laughing on a yacht, I felt a fresh wave of grief and rage. But I would look down at Mittens, sleeping peacefully on my lap in my quiet, quaint apartment, and remember David's voice, full of love and dry humor, explaining the plan to me long ago. Wait for the cue, Dad. Wait until she thinks she's untouchable. The waiting lasted 3 months. Then, she posted a picture of an enormous, hideous diamond ring, boasting about its price. I ran the numbers. She was well past the $500,000 mark. The moment had arrived. The fuse was burned down. It was time to call the lawyer and speak the hidden truth. 3 months I spent watching Stella's descent into financial oblivion were the hardest of my life. It was a bizarre form of torture, forced to witness the lavish destruction of my son's legacy by the very person he married. Yet every expensive dinner and every designer handbag she flaunted was a step closer to the activation of the trap David and I had discussed. My old life was reduced to simple routine. Every evening, after feeding Mittens, I would check Stella's social media. Her feed was a masterclass in performative wealth. She was clearly desperate to prove to the world and to herself that she was now an independent millionaire. The spending was frantic, almost hysterical. A massive renovation on her new penthouse, a personal trainer and chef, custom jewelry. Each new purchase was a digital breadcrumb, and I was meticulously logging every single one. I was acting as David's posthumous auditor. My goal was clear. I needed her to hit the $500,000 mark. This figure wasn't random. It was the amount David and I calculated would be a sufficient cushion to make her feel absolutely secure and untouchable, while simultaneously being a crushing, insurmountable debt once the true nature of the inheritance was revealed. The trauma of not just losing the $5 million, but of owing $500,000 was the essence of the poetic justice David intended. One cold Tuesday evening, the picture arrived. Stella, posing in front of her new, ridiculously oversized yacht slip, wearing a bespoke dress and a watch that cost more than my entire apartment's rent for a year. The accompanying text gloated about finally living the life I deserve. I grabbed my calculator and quickly totaled the expenditures I had logged. The new watch put her at $512,000 in liquid spending. She had crossed the threshold. She was financially overcommitted, arrogant, and vulnerable. The time for waiting, grieving, and observing was over. The moment for David's final, silent judgment had arrived. I stared at Mittens, who was now awake and watching me with wise, golden eyes. "It's time, old friend," I whispered. "It's time to make the call." I reached for my phone, my hand steady. I wasn't just calling a lawyer. I was initiating a legal chain reaction that would instantly strip Stella of her false wealth and return control of David's trust to its intended beneficiary. I dialed the number of Mr. Thompson, David's corporate lawyer, a man who, until now, had only processed the official, surface-level documents. Mr. Thompson likely saw me as a minor annoyance. I was about to shock him with a secret he didn't know existed. The code word, the key to unlocking Addendum Y, was heavy on my tongue. My hand didn't shake as I dialed Mr. Thompson's number. He was David's corporate attorney, a sharp man, but one who only knew the surface layer of my son's affairs. He certainly hadn't been privy to the dark family comedy David and I had concocted. "Mr. Thompson, this is Richard," I stated when he answered. His tone was polite but dismissive, clearly marking me as the grieving, elderly father he'd already paid his respects to. "Richard, Merry Christmas. Or rather, late Christmas," he corrected himself awkwardly. "I assume you're calling about the estate. Is there a particular item you feel was overlooked?" "Yes, Mr. Thompson. The estate is exactly why I'm calling," I confirmed. "I need you to re-examine the will. Specifically, the clause regarding the $50,000 for Mittens, the cat." A faint professional laugh came down the line. "Richard, with all due respect, that clause is sentimental, but non-binding, and certainly not worth a serious legal review. Stella is perfectly capable of managing the cat's care, or hiring someone who can." "You are missing the point, sir," I pressed, my voice hardening with authority. "I am not calling about a cat. I am calling about Heritage Code 47-A and the referenced Addendum Y. Have you looked at Addendum Y?" There was a long silence on the other end. Thompson, the meticulous corporate lawyer, was suddenly facing a gap in his knowledge. Addendums to wills, especially those with cryptic codes, are often buried deep in the file, easily overlooked when the main document appears clear. He was forced to admit the truth. I have the main documents, Richard. The Addendum Y was filed separately and marked confidential personal intent. I considered it symbolic, given the context." "It's not symbolic, Mr. Thompson. It's the entire foundation of the inheritance," I countered, leaning into the phone. "My son knew his wife. He did not trust her with his legacy. The addendum is his fail-safe, and her recent actions have just triggered it." Thompson's tone shifted from skeptical to intrigued. He knew David was not a man to leave sloppy paperwork. "I need you to open that file, sir. It is the key to the multi-million-dollar trust, not a pet fund. You will find that the sale of the family home was the precise condition that terminates Stella's control over the assets." "The sale of the house?" Thompson sounded shocked. "But she sold it 3 months ago. If that was the condition—" "Exactly," I said, a deep satisfaction filling my chest. "Stella's greed was the trigger. But to confirm that you are dealing with the genuine, confidential intent of my son, and not a desperate old man, I need to give you a private security code. David instructed that this phrase must be spoken to you before you review Addendum Y." I paused, letting the silence maximize the tension. Thompson was listening intently now. He knew he was on the brink of uncovering a massive, hidden legal operation. "What is the code, Richard?" he asked, his voice low and professional. "The code," I whispered, holding my breath, "is Mittens Castles the King." "Mittens Castles the King." I repeated the phrase slowly, ensuring Mr. Thompson understood every word. It was a private joke between David and me, combining the name of David's cat, Mittens, with a chess move, castling, a hobby we shared. It was completely nonsensical to anyone else, but to Mr. Thompson, it was the key to validating my claim. There was a profound silence on the line. I could hear the lawyer breathing, his professional calm shattered by the cryptic code. "Richard," he finally said, his voice a tight whisper, that phrase is in my confidential notes. Only David and I knew that was the validation for the addendum's true purpose. How on earth did you—" "David told me, Mr. Thompson," I cut in. "He trusted me to initiate the final phase when the time was right. Stella's greed dictated the timeline. Now you know I am legitimate. I need you to find Addendum Y and read the specific purpose of the assets." Thompson quickly regained his composure, shifting into high-alert professional mode. "Understood, Richard. Please hold the line. I will access the physical file now. This is unprecedented." The next few minutes were agonizing, I sat with mittens curled on my lap, the only sound being the cat's gentle purr and the muffled rustling of papers on the other end of the phone. I imagined Thompson pulling out the dusty file, shaking his head at the cat claws, then finding the officially sealed Addendum Y. Finally, Thompson returned. His voice was no longer that of a skeptical lawyer, but of a man who had just uncovered a meticulously laid, multi-million-dollar legal trap. "Richard, I have Addendum Y," he said, the shock evident in his tone. "The document confirms that the $5 million David acquired from the company sale, the assets Stella currently believes are hers, were immediately designated as the principal for a grantor-retained income trust, GRIT. And the purpose of the trust?" I pressed, my heart racing. "The primary beneficiary of the income is listed as the father, Richard," Thompson confirmed. "And the funds were explicitly intended for a charitable foundation dedicated to the financial security and independent living of seniors." I nodded to myself. David hadn't just secured my future. He had disguised it as a foundation to avoid Stella ever trying to contest it as personal inheritance. But the crucial part was still to come. "Read the termination condition, Mr. Thompson," I instructed. Thompson read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. "The trust shall remain revocable by the surviving spouse, Stella, provided the familial home remains unsold. Sale of the property constitutes a material breach and immediately transfers all managerial and beneficial rights of the trust to the designated successor trustee, Richard." The trap had sprung. Stella's greedy act of selling the house 3 months ago, the moment she publicly threw me out, had automatically forfeited her control. The $5 million was never hers. It was a legal illusion, a ticking time bomb. "Stella is no longer the trustee, Mr. Thompson," I stated, the finality of the law echoing in my voice. "I am, and I need you to initiate the immediate liquidation and recovery of all accessible funds." Moment Mr. Thompson finished reading the termination clause of Addendum Y, the legal landscape of David's estate fundamentally shifted. Stella's perceived $5 million fortune was instantly gone, legally transferred to my control. "We have to act immediately, Richard," Thompson stated, his voice now ringing with urgency. "Since she sold the house 3 months ago, she has been operating under false pretenses regarding the trust assets. We need to issue a formal clawback demand for all funds currently under her management." I confirmed the necessity of the immediate action. My patience was finally paying off. "She has been spending lavishly, Mr. Thompson. I estimate she has liquidated and spent over $500,000 of the trust's liquid capital." Thompson gasped. "500,000 of the principal? Richard, that's not just recovery, that's a massive legal violation. That money belonged to the Trust for the Financial Security of Seniors, your fund. She is personally liable for every cent she spent." This was the core of David's revenge, the precise legal trap. Stella hadn't just lost $5 million. Her greed, fueled by her 3 months of lavish spending, had created an immediate, crippling debt. She was now $500,000 in the hole. I instructed Thompson to proceed with absolute legal formality. "I want a demand letter delivered to her personal residence within 24 hours. It must be clear, concise, and state the exact amount of the trust principal she is required to immediately reimburse. The full $500,000 plus accrued interest." Thompson was already typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I will also file for an emergency freeze on all remaining assets connected to the sale of the business. Legally, The majority of the money should still be in the restricted investment accounts. We just saved millions, Richard. David saved millions, Mr. Thompson. I corrected him quietly. I merely spoke the code word. My mind raced ahead to Stella's inevitable reaction. She wouldn't just be angry, she would be hysterical. She had sold her stability, the family home, for the illusion of freedom, only to find that the freedom came with a price tag of $5.5 million. The $5 million she lost, and the $500,000 she now personally owed. I made one final request to Thompson. When you deliver the notice, please ensure Stella is informed that the sale of the house was the single action that activated the transfer. I want her to know that her own betrayal was the trigger. The lawyer agreed. I hung up the phone, a strange mix of relief and melancholy washing over me. David had protected me perfectly, using the cold, hard logic of trust law against his greedy spouse. Mittens the cat, my silent, furry accomplice, looked up at me as if to confirm that the game of castling the king had reached its endgame. In the next 24 hours we're going to tell. Quiet satisfaction of knowing the clock was ticking down to Stella's reckoning. I knew Mr. Thompson was moving with professional speed, filing the necessary court documents to freeze the assets and preparing the demand letter. Meanwhile, Stella remained oblivious, posting a frivolous picture of herself receiving a ridiculously oversized bouquet of roses. The contrast between her smug, temporary luxury and the legal tornado about to hit her was a morbid fascination. I reflected on David's brilliance. The grantor retained income trust, GRIT, was a masterpiece of legal protection. It was designed to look like a simple inheritance transfer, but the no sale of the house clause was the subtle, lethal trigger. David knew Stella was too fixated on cash liquidity to respect the emotional value of the home we shared. The true genius lay in the timing. David structured the trust so that the violation, selling the house, had already occurred 3 months ago, but the enforcement was hidden behind the code word. This delay allowed Stella to accumulate that devastating $500,000 debt, ensuring her financial ruin was comprehensive and absolute. I received a call from Mr. Thompson. His voice was grim. "Richard, the delivery confirmation just came through. Stella has signed for the official notification. The bank has been informed. The freeze is in effect on the primary investment accounts. She knows." I felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a sober recognition of the finality of the situation. What was her reaction? The courier reported hysterics. She immediately tried to call me, but I am legally required to direct her to her own counsel, which she apparently doesn't even have yet. Focused only on liquidating assets as she was. Thompson paused. "She tried to threaten me, Richard. She claimed the entire thing was a forgery." "It's not a forgery," I confirmed. "It's David's last professional courtesy to her. The truth about his feelings, delivered by a lawyer." I knew what Stella was facing. She would call her friends, the luxury dealers, the banks. She would realize the depth of the legal hole. The vast majority of the $5 million was now inaccessible to her, instantly transferred under my control as the successor trustee. But the real knife twist was the immediate, unpayable debt. She was now legally required to pay back $500,000 to the very fund intended for me, the man she had scorned and evicted. She had no liquid assets left, having poured everything into non-recoverable luxury items and renovations. The convertible, the jewelry, the new condo, all of it would have to be sold off immediately, and often at a loss, just to service the debt she incurred. The stage was perfectly set for the final, public collapse. The woman who craved wealth and status was about to have her entire world stripped bare thanks to a small, hidden, legal document and her own incurable greed. I made sure to be absent from Stella's life during the peak of her legal crisis. I didn't need to witness her screaming. The news traveled fast enough through the necessary channels. The court filing, the bank freeze, and the official demand letter were public records, and the sudden, spectacular crash of Stella's supposed fortune became the talk of the small, exclusive community she desperately wanted to join. The first sign of her collapse was the frantic deletion of her social media accounts. The yacht pictures, the diamond ring, the luxury trips, all vanished, a pathetic attempt to erase the evidence of her $500,000 spree. But the paper trail and the legal debt remained. Stella was forced to meet with her own hastily hired lawyer, who quickly confirmed the devastating truth. David's Addendum Y was ironclad. Her sale of the family home had irrevocably triggered the transfer of the $5 million trust to me, the successor trustee. The lawyer had to deliver the final, crushing blow. She was personally liable for the $500,000 principal she had spent from the trust. The assets she acquired, the expensive car, the bespoke furniture, the jewelry, were now liabilities, items she was forced to liquidate at fire sale prices to avoid civil litigation. The scene of her total defeat was delivered to me by Mr. Thompson. He was legally obliged to follow up on the recovery efforts. He described meeting Stella at her newly decorated, soon-to-be-foreclosed condo. "She was unrecognizable, Richard," Thompson recounted, his voice devoid of emotion. The woman who boasted about millions was screaming about her debts. When I presented the final balance, the $500,000 she owed your foundation, she went completely silent. Thompson handed her the detailed ledger of her own excessive spending, documented by the bank transfers, proving where the trust's funds had gone. "The ultimate irony, Richard," Thompson added, was when she finally broke. She didn't cry about David or the home. She screamed that she had made a terrible mistake selling the house, that she should have just put up with the old man and the stupid cat to keep the money flowing. That was David's perfect revenge. Stella finally admitted, in her moment of utter ruin, that her greed was her single greatest flaw. She admitted she valued the money over the man who loved her and the sanctuary he had left. Her choice to sell the house, her ultimate act of betrayal, had been the exact moment she signed her own bankruptcy papers. Stella lost everything. The banks and creditors descended. Her status-driven world crumbled into legal filings and public shame. The millions vanished, and the $500,000 debt ensured she would spend years clawing her way back to zero. And me? I didn't gloat. I simply signed the papers, taking full control of David's foundation. The final, dramatic justice was complete, paid for by Stella's monumental arrogance. The most spectacular collapse of Stella's life was swift and absolute. She lost the condo, the car, the jewelry, and any remaining shred of social standing. The banks and creditors were ruthless in recovering the $500,000 she owed my foundation. She disappeared from the public eye, her final act of greed having condemned her to years of financial struggle. As for me, Richard, the transfer of the $5 million trust was seamless. I immediately established the foundation as David intended, dedicated to providing secure, independent living for seniors. I hired excellent managers, ensuring the capital was used ethically and effectively, honoring my son's true legacy. I used a portion of the funds to purchase a beautiful, spacious home with a large garden, a place Mittens could finally run free without being called stupid cat. It was a sanctuary of peace and comfort, a far cry from the quaint rental Stella had relegated me to. I didn't stop there. I started traveling, fulfilling the dreams David and I never got to realize. I visited European cities, took cooking classes, and most importantly, I finally had the financial and emotional freedom to simply live. I volunteered at the local animal shelter in David's name and spent my days truly enjoying my retirement, surrounded by gratitude and respect, not greed. My life wasn't defined by my son's death, but by his final, brilliant act of protection. He used his professional genius to ensure that the people he loved, me and Mittens, were secure, while the person he despised, Stella, was perfectly punished for her lack of basic human decency. The irony is not lost on me. Stella's insatiable hunger for quick cash was the precise mechanism David used to legally strip her of everything. She sold her future stability, the house, for a moment of fleeting luxury, and that brief moment cost her millions. I now live a life of profound contentment. My dignity is fully restored. My financial future is secure. And I know that David's love and foresight will provide for me and others for decades to come. That is the end of my story. I leveraged a father's love and a secret legal code to achieve my perfect, justified revenge. Now I turn the question to you. Knowing that Stella publicly humiliated me and profited from my son's death, do you think I was right to activate the code and financially ruin her? What would you have done in my place to ensure justice was served? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to hear more true stories of calculated revenge and brilliant justice, don't forget to put a like on this video and hit that subscribe button. Thank you for listening. The end.